Hi, I'm Peggy Farron, and you're watching the Understand Photography Show, where we talk about travel, nature, and fine art photography. Welcome to the show. We're going to be talking with photographer Bobbi Lane, who's going to give us tips on creating incredible travel portraits. So if you're into street photography and travel portraits, you're going to really like this show. The Understand Photography Show is first a podcast. So if you're wondering why we don't have any visuals, that's why, because we have a lot more listeners than we have viewers, because we also put this out on YouTube and on Facebook. The Understand Photography Show comes out at 4 o'clock Eastern Time on Fridays. So watch us every week. We've been doing this for almost 3 years. We just figured it out. Wow, that's a lot of shows. It's a teaching interview show. So we try to teach something in every show. So we hope you're getting a lot out of it. And if you are, please give us a review on iTunes. That helps us more than anything. Check out our website at understandphotography.com. We've got a lot of good stuff on there. We've got some trips and tours. You can look at our schedule. We've got 175 articles, plus all of the show notes, plus our Tuesday photo tips. We've got a lot of information and training, and our motto at Understand Photography is we simplify the technical. So my guest today is Bobbi Lane, and Bobbi's an award-winning photographer who focuses on creative portraits, and she is very creative. She's a mentor, teacher, author who loves sharing her wealth of photographic knowledge, so welcome.
Thank you, Peggy. I'm really happy to be here. I'm so happy that you asked me to join you.
And you know what, I followed you for a long time. I took a class with you when you were teaching through Brian Peterson.
Oh, I'm still teaching through Brian Peterson.
Oh, you are? Okay.
Yes, yes.
Ah! So I took a class
probably Portraits
ago.
Unplugged. It was the Natural Light Portraits class.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
it's been over 10 years I've been working with them.
I bet it was 10 years ago that I took it.
Yeah.
And then I met you for the first time last year when we were both speaking at the New England Camera Club conference,
Right.
but I didn't get a chance to talk to you. So
Right.
it's nice that I get the chance to talk to you. Now, where do you live?
We live in Carver, Mass., which is right next to Plymouth,
Okay.
so just at the gateway to the Cape.
Okay, but you have a Los Angeles phone number.
I lived in LA for 25 years.
Ah.
So I left Massachusetts. I was in California for 25 years, 10 years in Connecticut, and in 2011 I moved back to Massachusetts near the area where I grew up, and now my husband, Lee Varys, and I have a house in Carver.
Wow.
And loving it, just
So
loving every minute of it.
Well, full circle. You went home. Maybe my son will come home. He lives in California, but how long do I have to wait? 25 years?
Maybe more.
All right, so just give us a little overview about you. Get the short version.
Well, I've been a professional photographer for a really long time. I started really when I was in high school, went to New England School of Photography in Boston, and then I started to work for Bill Sumner, who was a commercial photographer in Boston, and he changed my life. He was the person that really taught me how to see the light and understand the light, and more about business and about working with people and talking to people. But I was really interested in the beginning about large format product photography. So I never wanted to do portraits. I wanted to completely control everything in the studio. I thought that was the ultimate creativity. But once I was in California and I had clients that I'd established there, some of them started asking me to photograph people on location, or they would want their businesses, they wanted the facility shot, but more and more of it started getting involved with shooting people. And I shot for Mattel Toys, so then I started shooting kids as well. So my career kind of morphed from the product into people.
Okay.
And I'm a dedicated photo educator. I've been teaching really since I went to New England School of Photography, but I've been teaching on a professional level since the late 80s.
Wow.
First at UCLA Extension in Los Angeles, but I teach at the Santa Fe workshops and the main photo workshops at ICP in New York, and we lead travel trips all over the world. So I do truly care about sharing the information to help people become a better photographer the way that they want to be. Not to try to be like me, because you can't, but to actually learn something that's going to help you find the way to make a more creative, impactful image the way that you want to.
Okay, good.
So
this is going to be a good show, because this is what we like to teach at during this show. So
great.
All right, so let's talk about travel portraits, because you're leading photo workshops.
Yes.
I bet you get into that a little bit when you're leading the workshops. Is there a special camera, lens?
Well, you know, I have a favorite saying in photography, which is that everything depends upon everything. I can't give you a formula because it depends upon what's the point of your picture. What is it that you're trying to show? What are you trying to get across? For a standard portrait, you know, the medium telephoto lens, if it's a full frame in 85, I prefer the fixed focal length lenses because they're faster. So if you want to shoot wide open and throw the background out of focus. I'm a Fuji photographer. I'm on the Fuji X ambassador team.
Okay.
You know, they have the X cameras. Sounds kind of odd. I'm a Fuji X photographer.
I know,
but
it sounds like you used to be.
It's like, yes, it's the X
They need
team,
to
their
come
X
up with a
cameras.
different
I know.
name.
We keep telling them that they should. But so I've been shooting mirrorless with Fuji for the last 5 years.
Okay.
Gave up all my Nikon stuff, and I'm totally loving it. It isn't just the weight and the size; it's the quality, the ease of use. It's just great. So my favorite lens is a 56 millimeter 1.2. Since the Fuji's a crop sensor, that's the equivalent of an 85.
Okay.
So for a great head and shoulders portrait, I can shoot in really low light situations, throw that background out of focus, have really creamy bokeh in the background, but incredible sharpness right on the eyes where I need it. So that's my go-to. But I also really like to work with a medium telephoto in the range of like 24 to 85, because that allows me to make a larger portrait if I wanted to do a 3/4 or even a full length, or include more background, or zoom in to come into a tighter portrait. 2.8, it's still not quite as fast, but it's still a beautiful lens. So those two lenses are the ones that I use probably 90% of the time.
And you carry those with you? Do you carry two
Always.
cameras when you're traveling?
Sometimes, you know, it's again,
Because it's hard to
depends.
change lenses while you're
Yeah,
in the middle of
and-
street photography, isn't it?
Right, and sometimes what I do is I have a second camera on my belt, you know, those spider holsters, so I can just like pick it up, and it's like, you know, drawing a gun. It's like, boom, I'm ready to go, I'm ready to shoot. So I'll have one over my shoulder or over my neck, and I'll have another one on my waist, and that way I don't have to worry. And some places you go, like in Ethiopia, changing lenses in a dusty place is a little tough to do. You know, any place where you're in windy, dusty, it's not a great idea to be changing lenses.
I don't like to change. I'm lazy, man. I just want to, you know, and I went to Italy. I just carried two cameras, but I've got really good shoulders for carrying cameras. They're just very square. They don't,
That helps.
It doesn't slip on me. I got lucky. But it is a big problem for a lot of people that they slip, so they don't want to carry a bunch of cameras. And nobody wants to carry a bunch of gear when they're traveling either.
Right. I always take my rolling case, and then I have shoulder bags, or, you know, the convertible bags, and then I take what I think I'm going to need each day when I go out.
Yeah. So if you were going out to shoot, like, okay, let's say, do you go to Cuba? Is that one of your trips?
Yes, Cuba's one of the places.
Because
Yes.
that's a really good place to do portraits, right?
Fantastic. Yeah.
So, okay, so what are you going to carry with you? Both those lenses?
Yes.
All right. Now, what if
Always.
somebody's a Canon or a Nikon shooter? Like a nifty 50? Would that be a good one?
No, I would recommend that medium zoom. Both of them have like a 24 to 70 range.
Well, let's say if you're a crop frame, would you use the kit lens? But
you know,
doesn't
the
open.
Fuji kit lens is fantastic.
Okay.
It's probably the best kit lens that's out there. But other people have the kit lens. Think about the kit lenses. Normally, they're small.
Right.
So if you get the fixed 2.8, it's a bigger lens.
Okay.
So it depends upon how much weight you want to carry.
Yeah. And
But I'll tell you, I'm never carrying a 70 to 200 2.8 full frame lens ever again.
I got rid of mine.
Don't have to.
I got rid of mine even when I probably could have still used it, because the older I got, the heavier it got.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I know that one. Yep.
And so we had, you know, we bring the guy, Southern Photo Technical Service comes over here periodically to clean cameras and pick up repairs and things like that. They're in Miami. And we had the used photo pro guy come one day, and he sat here all day, and I thought, you know what, I'm just going to get rid of stuff. And I got rid of I had so much stuff I never use.
Right.
So, you know, if you're not using it, get rid of it, right?
I agree.
So, and I got a lot of money. I was shocked at how much money I got for it, because I can't remember what I paid for it. I bought it in 2001.
You're
and
lucky.
I'm talking, yeah, and he gave me $1,200 for it
That's great.
in 2017, maybe. I was pretty impressed at 16, because I got almost 50% of it back. I was pretty, because the cameras aren't worth anything.
Right.
So, okay, so how do you find the best subjects? Like, how do you choose someone to take a portrait of?
again, that depends upon where you are.
Okay, give me a few examples.
But since you brought up Cuba, let me start with Cuba. We went to Old Havana, and what you do, everybody lives life on the street. They have tiny little apartments, so they're sitting on their stoop, they're in the streets, everything's happening out there. So we would go and stand on the street corner and observe. Just watch. You have to like start to get an idea about your sense of place and what the rhythm is going on, and really pay attention to that. And that's true really of kind of like anywhere, but in Cuba it was amazing because you look here and you look there, and there's
a lot going on.
So much going on. So
it's a big city.
And part of it, true, and part of it also is, it's also important to let people see you. So you're not, an intruder. You're a stranger coming into their area, and if they see you standing there with cameras, and they see that you're not intruding upon anybody, or that you're observing, or you're being polite, then it becomes much easier to come up and approach people. So it's always good to be seen as well as to take your time to look. Okay. And then it's a matter of, I've been doing this a long time, so, and I always talk about this for my students about how important it is that you understand you're responsible for everything that's in the frame. So what I look for the action, the people, what's going on. I look for the light. My nickname is Mistress of Light. I teach a lot of lighting classes. So I look for the light and see where the people are in the light, and the backgrounds. I can pretty much make any background work if I have light that's appropriate to the subject. Okay. In other words, I'm not going to put somebody in the middle of the day in the sun. However, side lighting, back lighting, in the shade, under the porch, I look for those kinds of things and then see what's going on. And lots of times when I come up and approach people, like I may say, let's say that I'm looking at you and you're talking to somebody over here, but I see this is a good background this way. So instead of coming from you this way, I will come from over here and come slowly, so you have a chance to know that there's somebody there. And then when you turn and look at me, and then I talk to you about photographing you, I have you already in the light and the background that I want to photograph.
Right. And
so it makes it easier.
For those of us, because we have a lot more listeners than we do viewers.
Yes.
She was just talking about coming around because you're going this and this way. But I think they
coming in an angle so that I can see. I want that background instead of the background that's directly behind you. So then you'll face me, and then I'll have the background that I want.
Okay, that's good. That's good stuff you got going on there. So I'm going to jump way ahead of my notes because you started talking about light. Okay, so you're looking at the people to find an interesting looking person, but you're also looking for who's in good lighting, right? Is that what you just said?
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
Okay, and what is good lighting?
Well,
how do you know?
Again, because it's going to come back to, it depends, because what do you want to say about that person? Sometimes you would put somebody, let's say you have somebody with a real character face and they have lots of lines. Maybe you do want to have hard light on them because they will emphasize that. That wouldn't necessarily be flattering. But then maybe I want to make a flattering picture of somebody, then I'd be looking more for the shade. So for me, light is everything. The subject matter certainly is important, but if you don't have light that's appropriate to the subject, then you're not going to have a photo that has any impact. It's not going to make any sense.
Okay,
and I break it down into three things. All light has three aspects: the direction, the quality, and the depth. So where is the light? Where is it placing highlights and shadows on the subject?
Okay.
What's the quality? Is it hard or is it soft? It's going to change the mood, the description. And when I say depth of light, I'm talking about how dark the shadows are. When you have darker shadows, it's going to be much more dramatic photograph. So I'm looking at all of those things and thinking about the person and what do I want to show off about that person? What do I want my viewer to feel and to remember when they're no longer looking at that picture? What did they take away with them? Because if you don't have the light that's going to be appropriate for that, you're just not going to have the impact.
Okay, so you were talking about if you see an old, rugged-looking person, it would be okay to shoot them in the full sun overhead light, probably because
it's going to show off more
flattering,
texture.
but it shows off.
Right.
It's going to show off their wrinkles, which of course they probably won't like.
Well, I kind of figure they know they're old, you know. So, but the other thing that's
I know
also
I'm old, but I still don't want to see my wrinkles.
I definitely care about my wrinkles. But the catch light in the eyes is also important. I rarely go out and shoot in the middle of the day with the sun directly overhead. if you're really stuck on that, then try to find a piece of shade, or at least turn the person a little bit so that the sun is behind their head instead of directly on their face.
Would you blow out the background if you did that?
It depends upon what the background is. You know, yeah,
But
I don't know.
how
They
would
could
you,
be, what if they're
how would you light them if the sun was behind their
well,
head?
what if there could be buildings behind them, there could be trees behind them, they could still be in the sun. Doesn't mean that there's just sky behind them. So it's going to depend upon what the situation is.
Okay.
You know, in Ethiopia, there's like in the marketplaces, there's people who are in the sun, but there's still a lot of stuff that's going on in the background where you can see buildings, or you can see greenery or whatever. You know, blowing out the background is never really a great option.
Right.
But you know, there's so much. I don't mean to cop out when I say this thing about it depends, but it's again being aware. And if you do have somebody backlit, this is another one of my things that I make people really pay attention to, is look around for the light. What's the brightest thing you see? Well, that's the light source. Well, if somebody's backlit and this is all dirt in front of them, and the sun is coming down and bouncing on the dirt, then they're getting monster lit. The light's coming from underneath. Mm-hmm. So you could just be looking at the face and not paying any attention. You know, I always talk to my students about being as stupid as the camera. Mm-hmm. The camera can only record what you pointed at. Mm-hmm. But our brains compensate for everything. So I'm looking at you and thinking about how fantastic your eyes look, and I'm not paying any attention at all to the fact that the sun is bouncing on the ground right in front of you, so the underneath of your nose is lit, and you've got shadows on the top of your cheeks because the light's coming from underneath. Mm-hmm. So stand next to your subject and look around at the light. That's the most helpful thing to find out. Or just look around at the light. You know, say, what's the brightest thing I see? Oh, look, there's the sun bouncing off a building. Well, if it's bouncing off a building, that's a big, broad, soft light. So then turn around and say, well, what does the light look? Where is it falling? And then look over there, and then see if there's people over there. Well, then go over there. That's going to be beautiful light. So sometimes I find the light first, and then I will go and either hang out, wait for people to come into the light, or maybe people are already in the light.
Do you ever direct people to go into the light?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
So, all right. So I may as well stay on lighting because
sure.
So we're on lighting. Okay. So we want open shade if we can. Mm-hmm. What is open shade?
Open shade basically means that there's no direct sunlight, but they're probably lit by the sky, like a big patch of sky. There's so many different kinds of things. Backlighting is really great when you just have a rim of light around the back of them, but what's the light on their face?
Yeah, how are
that
you
will
gonna
depend
light
upon
face?
What's out there. If they're in a field, then all the light is going to be lighting up the field and sky, and they'll probably have great light. But if they're facing a forest, then their face is going to be really dark. So, you know, you kind of go back and forth.
Do you use flash?
I use reflectors. I always carry
travel around when you're doing
reflector.
travel.
Sure.
You bring a reflector
Sure,
with you.
Sure. I rarely use fill flash because
Okay.
I just find that it's just not natural.
Okay.
You know, if I can use a reflector, I will. If I use a flash, I would use a flash more off camera to really control all the lighting.
But you're not carrying that around with you when you're walking through the streets.
Not unless I'm doing something specifically where I know I'm going to do that.
Yeah.
But I look for porch lighting a lot. You know, if you have no light coming from the top, if they're underneath an overhang, underneath a tree, underneath a porch, underneath a bridge, underneath anything, then all the light comes in and not from above. How do you get shadows under the eyes? Light from above. If there's no light from above, there's no shadows under the eyes.
And you just called that porch light? See,
Porch
that's what I call open shade.
Well,
where you're in the shade, but the light is filtering in.
Open shade could still just mean you could have beautiful skylight coming from above. So now the light's nice and soft, but that direction, quality, depth,
right.
the direction coming from above, so you still have shadows under the eyes.
Right.
They just won't be that hard.
Yeah. That's why, but that's what, I don't call that open shade. Like if you have a cloudy day, I wouldn't call that open shade. It's interesting.
Yeah.
Different terminology. I would call what you just called porch light open shade, where they're in the shade, but there's a lot of light filtering in. That's a beautiful light.
It's a beautiful light.
As long as they don't back up too far, right? Then it's deep shade, right?
Right,
And
then
then
it's deep.
ugly. So, okay, so what if you have a high contrast scene where, and the only reason I keep bringing up Cuba is because
Sure.
I'm very familiar with Cuba, and so are you, obviously. And you're walking around in the middle of the day, because sometimes you are walking around in the middle of the day when you're traveling, and the buildings are giving shadows on half the street. And half the street's in the bright light because it's like 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
Well, we know that there's a limit to how much the range that our camera is going to be able to handle, our sensor is going to be able to handle. So trying to do a street scene when it's half and half, it's never going to work.
No, we're talking about portraits, though.
But portraits, I'm going to have somebody in the shade.
You're just going to move them into the shade.
Well, if they're in the shade and there's buildings around, and then that means that this building is lit over here, that building is acting like a big giant reflector bouncing the light back on.
Okay.
So then again, you've got big, beautiful, soft light. It's bounced sunlight, bounced off of a building.
Okay.
So that can be absolutely gorgeous.
Okay, yeah, all right. So, because that is a big problem, is lighting for people, especially natural lighting. Natural lighting is a lot harder to me than using artificial lighting.
May I just say thank you for saying that? Because, I teach a lot of lighting, and I teach a class called Portraits Unplugged, which is all natural light. Unplugged, there's nothing artificial there. But I also teach a lot of lighting. And I have people that come and take my classes using portable flash or studio because they say, well, I already shoot natural light. Well, doesn't everybody? I mean, and just because you shoot natural light doesn't mean that you understand it. Doesn't mean that you're seeing the direction, the quality, and the depth. So you know that there's a huge difference between having somebody face this way or face 45 degrees this way. It's going to completely change the way that the light is on their face.
Yeah.
So it isn't just a matter of being even just in the shade, because it still is like, where is it lighter, where is it darker? How are you defining the face from highlight to shadow? What's the quality? All of this it's all combined together. So shooting natural light actually is very difficult because you have to learn how to truly see what you're looking at. And again, we're born seeing, we take it for granted. It's just, we don't think about it.
And I think what you said about your brain compensates.
All the time.
Because, in my basic lighting class, the first thing I go through is I say you have to learn how to see the light, and then I put a bunch of pictures up. Where's the light coming from on this one? Where's the light coming? And some of them are flash, some of them are natural light. And boy, they have a hard time with it.
Yes.
Almost never people get, there might be one student who gets it, but most of them will say, oh, it's coming from the left. And you're thinking, no, it's coming from the right. How come they can't? Me who's got experience thinks, how can they not see that? But
I tell my students to squint, because when you squint, you can see the contrast more. So if they're looking at a photograph,
that's a good idea.
looking in reality, or looking at the LCD screen, squint when you look at it and you see the contrast more, and it becomes more apparent. Because again, we take seeing for granted. We're born seeing, so we never think about the light. And I get a lot of students when they're starting out that it's all subject matter to them. There's nothing else, and it's like, no, this is all got to come together. So if you don't pay attention to the light, again, you're not going to have a photo that's going to have real impact or meaning or the feeling that you want.
Yeah.
So you've got to bring that awareness up. It's I want to say coming out of the darkness into the light, and I'm saying that kind of facetiously, but it is even in your own understanding of that, of being able to truly be aware. I look at light all the time. And when I do my presentations, my opening slide says, Bobbi Lane, photographer, photo educator, lover of light. I look at it all the time. I'm always aware of what's going on, how the light is falling on. I'm driving down the road and I look at something bouncing, or the late afternoon, I hold my hand up and say, wow, look at the way the light's defining my hand. Probably not a good idea while I'm driving to do that. But, I'm always paying attention to it, because once you start to see it, you can't stop.
Yeah.
Which is what's going to make you a better photographer.
I totally agree with that. So in summary, first thing you're doing is looking for light. So you either want your subject either in full shade, but maybe what I'm calling open shade, you're calling porch. What'd you call it? Porch light?
Porch light. It just basically
Where
means there's no light from the top.
But there's a lot of light filtering in.
Right. So open shade
it's a
still
nice
could be skylight coming from above. So it's all coming in.
Nice soft
Then you
light.
have great light in the eyes, and you have beautiful light on the face. It's really just
That's
gorgeous.
one of my favorite ways to light somebody. In fact, that's what I tell people. If you are in midday sun and you have to do a portrait, if you can find that type of lighting, your porch lighting,
Right.
that's the ideal. Okay, but that's not an option. We've got an old leathery person. We don't mind if they're out in the hot sun.
But you can turn their face a little bit, so at least it goes up a little and they get light in their eyes.
I was just going to say one thing that what I teach. I learned this from Al Gordon. Do you know him?
No.
Anyway, He said, I took a class from him one time, a long time ago again, and he said, you know, throw anything at me. So somebody said, bride and groom in harsh lighting. And back then the men still wore black tuxes too. It was a long time ago. But he said, I just don't, I just don't have them look at the camera. And I thought, well, that is really good advice, because if they're looking away, you don't really notice that they've got the dark shadows and things like that as much if they're looking at each other or something like that, if you're doing two people.
Yeah,
So,
it still comes back to it depends on what you like to do.
but it was a good advice for harsh lighting. If
Yeah.
you're stuck in harsh lighting, you know, having them, you said, turn their head to
Right.
the
You
light
could
a
always
little
have,
bit.
you know,
or,
he could nuzzle into her and she could tip her head back a
or
little
you
bit
could
and then she's
find,
got light on her face.
or you could find, you know, and Bambi Cantrell taught me this one. Find some big fat guy with a white shirt and you got a reflector.
Done that. Yep, I have had that. Come over here, stand right here. Yes,
That was so funny when she taught that, but I have used it.
yes,
And white walls, just, you have to
Sure.
watch color temperature, right?
yes, of course.
Okay, so what other kind of lighting? So, or if you saw,
Backlighting is always great.
if you have a
Again, depending upon,
reflector,
well, no, again, it depends upon what's in front of them.
okay.
You know, we're talking about the world.
so your
Backlighting doesn't mean that it's just dark in front of them. Again, it could be wide open skies or fields or other buildings or whatever. So
Okay, but there's something has to be reflecting the light
something's
back
got
on
to
their
bounce.
light.
Something's got to bounce
Okay.
back. Yeah.
All right, so backlight, porch light,
Porch light.
direct light. What if they are in deep shade? What are you going to do?
Well, again, it depends upon the portrait. So if they are in deep shade, that doesn't, as long as you expose correctly, it just means the light's going to be flat.
Okay.
But if they're, let's say that they're, you know, I always talk about garage door lighting because you have more control on that. So if you had somebody in a garage and you had them all the way in the back of the garage, well, effectively, that large door is now small because they're further away from it, right? I have my students do this. If here's the light source and you hold it right in front of your face and it's only 3 inches away, your face is covered with light. Now hold your hand arm's distance away. It's the same size light source, but it's now much smaller in relationship to the subject, therefore it's become smaller. So now it's become more of a pinpoint, more directional light. So again, when you say deep shade, there's a million kinds of deep shade, there's a million kinds of shade. So if you say deep shade, it could just be really flat, or it could be more directional, so it almost looks like it's a spotlight. So, you know, in Ethiopia, I photograph people in huts. You know, that there's a tiny little window on one side, and it's just like shining a spotlight on them. And I don't mean direct sunlight coming through. It's just because here's the light source, and you're in a hut that's this big, then that's just a very small directional light. So then it's a matter of like just trying to get them to pose or turn so that they have the light on their face the way that you would like it.
You know what else we look for with light? Since now I'm stuck on light for a little while. I'm glad you like to talk about. So I like lighting too.
Always.
I look for like one beam of light or something like that, where you can, you know, this with birds I do this a lot, where you'll see a bird and it's like in a hot spot.
Yeah.
And you can get nice, you know, exposed for the bird, get that to come out, but everything else goes like
Goes
black.
dark, yeah. There's
That's cool. I like that light sometimes.
I spent 5 years going to Idaho working on a powwow project, photographing people at this one particular, the Shoshone-Bannock Reservation. The middle of August, there's powwows all over the country every weekend, but every year there's normally each one has their own, and they're basically dance contests. And in the late afternoon, they have it's outside, but there's a kind of like a grandstand that's like two horseshoe shapes that come around. There's an entrance from the east and an entrance from the west. But when the light comes down low, when it's late afternoon, sometimes there is just a spot of light. And people are dancing around, and I saw this spot of light, and I waited. I focused on it, exposed for it, and I waited for somebody to come into the light, and I got a little boy. I got a little boy profile in this spot of light with, again, everything almost black behind him. Just enough detail to see that, because he was little, you could kind of see a little bit of costumes in the background, but they were really like deep. And he was just glowing out of that. So it's again, it's being prepared, being aware, and then knowing when you can get the opportunity. And patience is always important.
Yeah.
Patience.
Patience is not one of my virtues. But I love that. I'm going to just brag about one more picture, which I don't know where it is now that I'm thinking of it. But the last time I went to Cuba, we were just walking down the street, and you know how they have the, you know, as you said, it's a big city.
Yes.
And they don't even have windows, so they just have like slats. But they have the door, and some of the doors are quite big because they used to be big fancy places that they compartmentalized into little apartments. But anyway, it was bright in the middle of the day, and one of the doors was part open, and I looked in there, and it was pitch dark except for there was a lady. There's all kinds of people giving manicures. Have you noticed that?
Yes.
Everybody gets their fingers
and
polished.
barbers too. There's barbers everywhere. Yeah.
Well, anyway, she was just sitting there with that little manicure light, and the rest of the thing was dark. And I was like, that is so cool. So the whole, you know, there were about 4 of us together, and we all took pictures of it, and then they came out to see what we were doing. So we were showing them the pictures, and they were so excited. It came out so cool because the whole room went dark with just this lady and her, you know, her customer doing the nails.
That's
so
being aware.
It was cool, but looking for the light, like you said. That's such a good advice because nobody ever says that. And that is the
most important thing.
It is.
We can't do much about making photographs without it, but it isn't just a matter about having exposure. It's, again, that direction, quality, depth, all those 3 things together combined to be able to truly get the idea across of what you want.
Yeah, yeah. All right, so when we're out doing portraits, travel portraits, so we're just walking the streets basically. So we're looking for light first. Is it better to be like in a tourist area, do you think, or is it better to be in
I don't think there's any limit about making a good portrait of somebody. I've been to tourist areas. I've been to places that have been completely and totally off the beaten path. I always, a couple of things. First off, everybody has to find their own way of making portraits. They have to find their own way of shooting, of what it is that they like to do. Personally, I love people. I like to make contact with people. I like to go up and talk to people and have them look at me. I like to have them look in the camera. Now, I'm not saying that every portrait that I do is that, but I like that directness. I like having an interaction with the person. So to me, that's what I do. I'm not saying that that's what everybody else should do. That's what I do. So I try to find something about that person, that spark, that essence, something in them. I normally talk to people. You know, I'm not, I think that this might be one of your questions, and I'm just going to go ahead and answer it now. For me, I don't stand across the street with a long lens and get a secret picture. Some people do that and do a really good job at that. That's not me. I want to go up and have an interaction with people, so that's what I do. And it doesn't mean that I do all headshots, because I certainly do want to include the sense of place. Right. You know, you're telling a story about what's going on. But I have made some great portraits in the midst of downtown tourist areas, and I've made some great portraits in the, you know, in the tiny little huts of Ethiopia where there's nothing around. So this is, you know, I can cry when I say this, but this is something that is really important to me, and I think that when you travel, you come to a greater understanding. And I'm misquoting Mark Twain here, but you know, travel is the antidote to bigotry. It's when you travel and you meet people, the more you travel and the more different people you meet, the more you realize how much we are the same. And I really believe that there's all these people are living on the planet right now at the same time. The person who's over there in Ethiopia is no different from you and I sitting here right now, except for what it artificially looks like. But the truth is that everybody gets up in the morning, they want to have something to eat. They want to have family, they want to have community, they want to feel that they're doing something, they're contributing, they want to be safe, and they want to love and they want to be loved. And when you recognize that, then people recognize that you recognize that in them. One of the most horrible things for me to see in Ethiopia is people jumping off tour buses, shoving their picture in a native's face, saying, "Oh, honey, look at the funny-looking person," and they treat people as objects instead of human beings. Wow. And I would never do that. And when I do the travel tours, we have big talks about this before we go anywhere. Again, get out, observe, see what's going on, pay attention, let people see you before you start to approach people, and then, again, be kind, smile. You know, having that interaction, having that connection. There's nothing more important than honoring somebody's light.
So how do you make that connection?
Well, it's pretty obvious that I'm taking photographs when I have a camera hanging around my neck. So that already is kind of like a given. But I just walk right up to people. I walk up to people anywhere in the world, and I smile at them. I don't speak any language but English, and I always jokingly say I don't always do that very well. They can hear my tone of voice. Whether they can understand my words or not, they can hear my tone of voice. And they can see me gesture, and they see me looking at them and smiling at them. And I'll have the camera, and I'll say, is it okay to take a picture? And sometimes people go, oh, no, 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 no. And then I try to say, oh, but your eyes are so beautiful. And I'll say, your eyes are so beautiful.
So you'll just be like motioning with your hands.
I will motion with them, and I joke around with them, and I laugh, and I smile at them, and they respond. People respond. When you pay attention to people, they respond. And that isn't always, but it does work most of the time. And I smile at them, and I say hi, and I try to get them to say hi because, right now, say hi, everybody, say hi. When you say hi, your mouth goes into the perfect position, hi. And you feel good because you're saying hi, which is a greeting, and your eyes light up, and your shoulders relax, and it makes a connection. And hi is universal. Anywhere in the world, people will say hi. But what's even more universal than that is ha 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 ha.
Laughing.
Is laughing. And you start to laugh, and other people will laugh. And when they laugh, now they're comfortable and they're relaxed, and now you have a relationship. Okay. I laugh at people. I laugh not at them. I laugh with people all over the world, in every country I have ever been to. And I've been to a lot of Arabian countries. Okay. And when I approach an Arabian man, when they agree, they get very stoic. They get very strong, and they stoic, and they do something like this. And so I'll take those pictures, and then I'll just poke my head out, and I'll go ha 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 ha, and then they totally crack up laughing because they don't expect it. And I get these wonderful pictures of people being real. They're being authentic. They're not giving me a pose or giving me, now people are doing this
the
or
peace
this
signs,
or
the thumbs up sign or the gangster sign.
Well, hang loose.
What is that? I don't know what all that means.
Whatever. It's like whatever. It's like I don't want that. I want the real. I want the life that's inside of somebody. I want that light to come across. So that's what I do. And it doesn't always work, but I have to tell you it works 95% of the time.
Okay. Now what about, I'm not shy, but some people are. Yeah. And they are very uncomfortable to go up to someone. And do you have tips for them when you lead a workshop? How do you get your shy participants to? Yeah,
it is a challenge. And there's that saying, feel the fear and do it anyway.
Yeah.
So we talk a little bit about that. I talk a lot in my workshops about as a photographer, what are your fears? And also, what do you think the subject's fears are? And to come to the understanding that lots of times the photographer is projecting fears on the person, that the person doesn't have those fears at all. So trying to understand what your fears are and walking through them. Like, I'm afraid, well, they agreed to be photographed. First they're going to reject me, and then they agree to be photographed, but now what do I do? Well, have it all planned out ahead of time. Okay. Get your exposure, have your camera ready, look around and see what you want to do for your shot, so that when they agree, then you can actually talk to them instead of playing with your camera, because then you've lost all connection. Oh. Talk to people, ask them questions about themselves, listen to what they have to say, respond, involve them.
Well, if they can't speak English, though.
They can't speak English, you still can.
But you're right, you don't want to be messing with your camera. You want to be able to get their attention.
Right, you want to be able to be there with
most
them.
of the time, I will just motion to my camera and smile, and most people will agree to it. Not all people, but some people hold their hand up like, no, I don't want my picture taken.
And sometimes I can get around people. I can get people to still agree, even though they will do the here's the hand, and we're not going to go any further. And lots of times, if there's other people around, they start teasing one another. So then I say, oh, no, then I'm going to bring you in too. So you come in here too. And then everybody's laughing. And it becomes an event. And if it becomes an event, then it's great. And I'll give you another example of this. I've been to Ethiopia twice. Okay. And to the Omo River Valley, which is where all the tribal cultures that are the same that they've been for 10 or 20,000 years. And this one village that we went to, there were these 3 friends, and I was photographing all of them, and I got them to do the ha 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 thing, which they all were hysterical about that. The next year I came back, and when I got out of the car, they saw me, and they came right up to me and went ha 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 ha.
Oh my God!
So they remembered. So it's an event. It isn't just somebody coming up and sticking their camera and going snap. It's an event, and they become more aware of that, and they have a good time. If they have a good time, then you've made it an impact. You've made a relationship.
Yeah.
So realize that some people will say no. I bow a lot. Always when I photograph anybody, when I'm done, I always do this. I say namaste, and which is I honor the light within you. Whether they understand me or not, they understand when I do this.
When you bow.
That I am honoring them, and that's how I leave everybody.
Okay. Now, have you ever run into like cultural sensitivities where they don't like their picture taken at all?
That's an interesting question because there's some myths about that. There's some really big myths about it, that it was African tribes
Right.
that thought that photography was going to steal their soul.
Yeah.
Well, Africans in the tribal villages didn't even know what a camera was. How could it steal their soul?
Yeah.
It's so. The actual truth is that there is a culture in Mexico, and I can't remember which one it is, that they are the ones that have that sensitivity. I have never run into it anywhere else in the world. In Myanmar, in the Middle East, in Africa, I've never run into it anyplace else.
I've never run into it. You do hear stories, though.
Yes.
I mean, there are people who don't want their picture taken, yes, but
right.
Culturally, I don't.
Right.
I've never seen it either. So, do you learn when you go to Ethiopia, for instance, do you learn some key phrases so that you can kind of communicate a little bit? Or?
That's pretty rough because there's about 40 languages in Ethiopia.
Oh.
So, in fact, each tribe that we go to, we have an overall guide, but then we pick up individual guides for each village because there are dialects and languages that are completely separate from every other one. So no, I know very little. I can, my Italian is, grazie, that's it.
That's it. Buongiorno, you know that one.
Yeah, buongiorno, that's about it. It's like.
You know what I know how to say in Italian? O fame. You know what that means? I'm hungry.
Oh, I'm hungry.
I learned how to say that anywhere I go. When I'm hungry, I want to eat, and I want to be able to communicate that. Now, what settings do you sit? Do you shoot in manual or aperture priority, or?
That's another really good question. I think that's something that has to become comfortable for each person. Until I started shooting with Fuji, I always shot on manual. I've used aperture priority. I've tried it. It never seems to work really well for me. In Fuji, the metering system in the Fuji is so good, I use aperture priority a lot. However, I do know if I'm going to be in a lighting situation that this is the light's not going to change. I'm much better off going on manual because if I change how light or dark the background is, even though they're in the same light, then it's going to change my settings. So then I just go to full manual. So I do both depending upon what the situation is like.
Okay. And what do you teach that to your
sure.
students too?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm just curious. Because you can't get around some situations unless you shoot in manual. That's why I think it's so important for people to understand that. Even if that's not what they're doing, they need to know how.
Everybody should understand. It's interesting that a lot of my classes, when I'm talking about, because I teach lighting, portable lighting as well, and we talk about dragging the shutter, balancing flash and ambient light. Mm-hmm. And in that case, you have to take a manual reading of your ambient light, and then you adjust your flash accordingly. And I find that a lot of people don't know how to take a reading in the camera on manual.
No.
And they've never done it because all they've ever done is either aperture or shutter priority.
And most of the teachers teach aperture priority. I don't understand that, but
yeah, manual it's a given. Everybody should know.
That's the first thing, the very first thing we teach here.
That's
it's
good.
Like, okay, you got to learn how to shoot in manual. Okay, so composition. Let's talk about composition.
Yes.
Because portrait composition, most of my listeners, by the way, so all this stuff that you keep doing, you got to remember that more listeners.
I'm trying to remember. I talk with my hands a lot.
Anyway, they're not portrait photographers, so they really don't know the composition rules for portraits. Or can you guide us there?
I have a very simple rule that will work for almost everything.
Okay.
Put eyes 1/3 from the top of the frame. So if you're doing a headshot, which is just below the clavicle, right, and at the top of the head, you want the eyes 1/3 from the top of the frame. If there's extra space above the top of the head, all it's going to do is distract the viewer from looking at the person's eyes. But that 1/3 from the top of the frame works whether it's horizontal or vertical, and works if you're doing a 3/4 or a full length. 1/3 from the top of the frame means that you have very little space over the top of the head, and then you can adjust the rest of it accordingly to how much that you want to show, but you will always have better balance with that. If the eyes are in the middle of the frame, you play connect the dots with the eyes compositionally. So if you put the eyes in the middle of the frame, that makes a horizontal line through the middle of the frame, which cuts it in half. And then you have all this empty space over the top of the head anyway that you don't want. So why do you have extra space over the top of the head? Include more of the body, and then if you need to crop, you have choices. If you have the space over the top of the head, you have to crop it off, and then you have no choice about how you're going to crop the body because you have to get rid of all the empty space over the top. So stay away from the bullseye. Don't put the head in the dead center of the frame. 1/3 from the top. If you're shooting horizontal, put the eyes 1/3 from the top, but also the face 1/3 from the edge of the frame. And give a little bit of space on the side. And give them the space in the direction they're looking. So if they're 1/3, if you're shooting horizontal and the face is 1/3 away and the face is turned towards where the more space is, not towards the short side, because then you feel like they're pushing right up against the edge of the frame.
I always say like they're going to hit the side of the picture.
Right, that's right.
But I'm glad you said that, because eyes at the top grid line on the rule of thirds, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, pretty much. And there's another little trick to this, that if somebody has really incredible eyes, cut the top of the head off.
Yeah.
So the eyes are even higher in the frame. The higher the eyes are in the frame, the more the viewer's attention is focused on the eyes. You are so pulled into eyes when you cut off the top of the head.
But that's only if you're doing a close-up.
Yeah, that's only if you're doing a close-up. You wouldn't do that if you were doing a 3/4 or a full length.
But
no.
people do.
Yes, I am well aware, yes.
Because that's something that I think what you're saying about the eyes 1/3 of the way down, if you're doing a tight head shot, yeah, the head's going to be very close to the top, if not cut off at the top.
Well, it doesn't have to be cut off, but you
but
just
it's going
don't
to
want
be
to have
close
the extra
to the
space.
top.
Yeah, close to
but
the
if
top.
you're doing a full shot and the eyes are at the top, what'd you say, 1/3 of the way down?
Yeah.
There's going to be a lot more space above the head,
No,
but
there's
that's
not.
okay.
No, it depends upon your viewpoint. If you think about, it's close enough. It's close enough. You're still not going to have that much space over the top of the head.
Well, it's going
not
to be
like you're
what you
making
said. It's going to be the better balance.
Right.
though.
You're going to have a better balance.
Right.
Basically, it's avoid having space over the top of the head.
Well, you want some space though.
A little bit.
If you're doing a full shot, you're going to have more space above the head than if you're doing a close-up. Was my whole point of that, because the eyes are always at that same rule of thirds grid line, right on the top third. So it's such a good guideline that people don't seem to know.
It's simple and it works.
And it's only one thing to remember.
Right.
And then, of course, the room in front, like you said, that's another thing, too. What about, is it better to do close-ups, do you think? Or should we show some of the elements that are around them? Or, I know you're going to say it depends. I already know what you're going to say.
It does depend. However, it's pretty easy to do a close-up of a face, because if you just see the face, you're going to be pulled into the eyes. And you can see that. So you can get something of the person by doing a close-up. However, it's much more difficult to include more of the background, that then you're doing more environmental portraits. So you're using the background to help tell the story, both with information and with composition.
Okay.
So it's more difficult, but there'll be more story. You could just do tight headshots of everybody anywhere in the world, and you'd be bored in about 10 pictures.
Yeah.
So it's much more interesting to include much, much more than that. And it doesn't mean you have to do a full length of everything, but even a headshot that is, when I say a headshot can be the tight headshot, a medium headshot would be above the waist, right? So now you've got room for arms and legs to move around, or arms to move around and be part of the composition and include a lot more of the background.
Okay.
So, how much story are you trying to tell? Sometimes a really tight headshot, I keep coming back to Ethiopia because those are the images popping out of my head.
Yeah.
I had this man that had these incredible eyes. He had a colorful striped hat on, and he had his hand up to the side of his face, just on the side of his face. And I cut off the top of his head and cut off just enough so you have enough neck to hold the head up. And that was the whole story. I had the stripes. They were the Ethiopian colors.
Okay.
The eyes were incredible. You could see his the color of his skin, the intensity of his gaze, the gesture of his hand. That was a story without really having anything in the background. But just a straight head, can be very interesting depending upon the expression of the person's face, or it could get really boring.
Yeah, yeah. But you're right, if you add some elements.
Yes. Sometimes I do headshots with 20mm lenses.
Okay.
And I come right up to somebody's face, which will distort them. But now
say.
I see a huge amount of what's in the background. So it's a different kind of a story. It's a different kind of perspective. And it's another thing. Well, people say, "Oh no, people don't want you to get too close to them." It's like, well, if I'm doing a headshot with a 20mm lens, my camera's about 4 inches from their face. And I've done that with people who don't speak English. So, you can do anything. It's like, when people go out with the limitations, they're saying, oh, I don't want to use a great big lens to photograph somebody because they're intimidated. Nobody knows anything about photography. They're not going to be intimidated by a lens. They're going to go, oh, there's a camera and a lens, right? Or you can't get too close. It depends upon how you work with somebody. They don't know. That's another thing of the photographer projecting their fears or their limitations.
I think when it's uncomfortable is if there are a lot of photographers all shooting the same thing.
I try to really discourage that as much as I possibly can.
When we do our Cuba tours, we break into small groups when because we'll have like an hour. Okay, we're going to walk the street for an hour.
Right.
We're going to meet. You start on this street, you three start on that street, and we meet up.
Yeah,
so that
we do
don't
the same
have
thing.
A big,
we don't have them all lined up to.
Because you don't want.
No, it's
even
crazy.
6 people at once is.
It's crazy.
It's
but
intimidating.
Then again, I want to have that relationship with my subject.
And you're not going to have that with 6 people.
I can't do that when there's 6 people around.
Yeah.
We kind of have a general rule that we tell people that don't poach the shot. So it's like, if somebody is photographing somebody, don't come up with a long lens over their shoulder, because then the person being photographed is now going to be distracted by this person. So, be patient. Let that person, and if you want to photograph, then you can come over and photograph. But don't be trying to doing that at the same time, because then first off, the subject feels like an object.
Yeah.
And they've lost the relationship because they're looking here and they're looking over there and they don't know where to look.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a general rule.
That's good.
In my workshops in the States, when I'm teaching people stuff, even in the Portraits Unplugged, there's only one photographer at a time. The other people, they can hold reflectors, they can help with the styling, but there's only one photographer at a time. That's an absolute insistence.
That's so good.
I get out my pocket whip on my phone to tell people, if you're not going to
hit
follow
'em?
this, I pull out my pocket whip.
Oh, good girl. I like that. When I first started in photography and started taking classes, I had no confidence at all. And I felt like the slowest learner on earth, right? So I really didn't feel comfortable ever in a class. And most of the classes I took, they'd go, okay, because I was taking portrait photography classes, they would go, okay, we have this model, everybody get a shot. And only the super pushy people got pictures.
Right.
Nobody else anybody who wasn't pushy did not get a chance to shoot.
And then what good is it so that everybody's got a picture that looks the same?
I never wanted to be a teacher, which is funny because now I've been teaching for 10 years, but I didn't think I was smart enough. But I was like thinking, if I was this teacher, I would be making people take turns. This is so unfair, But then I was too scared. I was afraid to take the picture too because I didn't feel confident.
Yeah.
But if the teacher had encouraged me to take the pictures, it would have helped me gain confidence,
Right, absolutely.
So that's a great rule,
Absolutely.
one at a time. That's a great rule. So what do you think makes a better portrait for street portraits or travel portraiture? Candid or posed?
That comes back to the type of photographer that you are.
Okay.
So for me, I'm almost always posing somebody. I rarely I'm not a street photographer in the classic sense, that I'm walking around with the little tiny lens and nobody knows that I've got a camera and I'm like doing all of this. And that's great if that's what you want to do. There's some great photographers who are doing that. But that's not what I do. For me, I am always direct. It depends upon, it's the type of person. I think it's pretty obvious by now what type of person I am. I mean, I like people and I like being direct with people and I like having that relationship. I'm not a good classic street photographer. Okay. That's not what I do. So I think it's got to be, it's got to be what you like. And that's not saying when somebody's starting out and they're shy, so they want to stand on the other side of the street because they're afraid. But you still have to learn, if you want to be a street photographer, the classic sense, you still have to learn how to do that.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Have you ever gotten to the point where it just sort of got awkward with, like, you took too many pictures? Like if you have say you're leading a photo workshop and you've got people with you. Has anybody ever like?
Well, there's in my workshops in the States, when I have people go out and do this, and I have them go out and photograph people that they don't know. They have to talk to them, they have to pose them, they have to put them in the light, they have to actually take control of this. They all hate me when I give them this assignment. And then they come back with all these incredible stories about the people that they met and the experiences they had, right? So it really does like pay off. So I'm sorry, I just distracted myself. What was the question? I get a little carried away on that one.
I was just thinking, does it ever get awkward where you feel like
awkward.
the subject is starting to feel like they're tired of pictures?
Yeah, one of the things is that I will tell people when you're talking to somebody to let them know what your intentions are, what you're going to do, how long it's going to take. And if people say, well, I've got 2 minutes, then you say, okay, great. And then you respect that. But you don't want to keep doing things and making people feel awkward. But lots of times people say, may I take your photograph? And people go, yeah, and they think you're going to take one picture and walk away. So I tell my students and I tell my subjects, I'm going to shoot a variety of things. I'm a portrait photographer and I like to kind of move you around. I'll help you with posing and expression. I might turn you towards the light a little bit more. So, but we'll have fun. We'll have a good time doing this. And it's going to take maybe 5 or 10 minutes. Is that okay? So you do it ahead of time.
That's great advice.
So then the subject, because the subject, the first thing they're going to do is like, what do you want me to do? So, because they don't know.
Right.
So you give them all the information up front. Let them know everything that you're doing, who you are, why you're shooting, why you picked them. What are they going to say? Why do you want to photograph me? You're going to break the camera. Nobody gets a good picture of me, of which say, yeah, but you've never been photographed by me.
Good
so
comeback.
So it's again, it's like you have fun with people, right? But let them know everything, right? So then every question that you think that they could ask, you tell them before they have a chance to ask the question. Then they're like, oh, okay, well, this sounds like fun.
That's good advice.
Yeah.
Now, has anyone ever asked you for money?
I seldom pay people. In the States, I won't ever pay anybody. I won't ever do that. In Cuba, I'm sure there's that lady with the cigar in her mouth and the hat against the yellow wall that everybody in the world has photographed that woman, and that's her job. So yeah, you pay her. Okay. I've been to India once, and the only time, and people would put their hands out, and I wouldn't pay them. Under certain circumstances, I would. There was one time we were driving down the road, and there was a man with a bear on the side of the road, and he would go to marketplaces and perform with the bear. So, again, that was his job. I paid him, right? His job was to be a performer. So in that case, I would do that. Normally, I don't. In Ethiopia, what we do in Ethiopia is we normally go in and talk to the tribal chief, and we give the chief money for the village instead of paying people individually. But the more and more tourists, now that they've built the road that goes all the way down to the Omo village, or the Omo River, it's not a gravel road anymore. Now all the tour buses can go down there, and they're all standing there with their hands out. So it's become very commercialized down there.
That's what's happening to Cuba. Have you been there recently?
It was 2 years ago. 2 years ago, and we didn't.
That is getting like this pretty bad.
We had one person ask us for money the entire time we were there. In Myanmar, it was very funny. There were these two ladies, not elderly but older ladies. They were friends, and they were at the market. And I went up and started talking to them. And again, no English. And they kind of like looked at each other, and then one of them just kind of very shyly put her hand out, and I laughed, and I went, no, you pay me. You pay me. And they laughed, and then I made photos of them. So, lots of times you can get around it. There are some people, if they insist, it's like, don't come near me, then I'm like, okay, there's 10 million, there's 10 billion people in this world.
Yeah.
If you don't get this one, there's going to be somebody else that you can photograph. I never worry about not getting the shot, because there's a million of the shots.
Yeah.
So, you can move on.
I see. I do give them money in Cuba because I just feel bad because they're so poor.
Again, it depends. It's like I'll give you one other thing, is that we took a little horse-drawn wagon ride around Cienfuegos. And there was 3 men in the wagon. One of them had his degree in sugar engineering and worked in the sugar factory until it closed. And another one was a part-time school teacher, and then the other one owned the horse and the rig. And when they asked for money, you know, we're certainly going to pay them, but they asked for like a lot of money. We thought it was like a lot of money. And we went, no, I don't think so. So we offered them like half. And then they took us around their neighborhood, and they showed us the schoolhouse, and people would come by and say, hi, how you doing? And they ask how the family is. And, you know, and by the end of the tour, and we're realizing who these people are, what's going on, by the end of our little trip, we gave them everything they asked for.
Oh.
Because what's that to us?
Yeah.
It's nothing, and to them it's a month's salary.
Right.
So in that case it was helpful. But I like to do more, like if I can give money to schools or something like that, or bring things to provide to schools or for kids, that I think has got a lot more value to it, and takes it away from the people commercializing themselves.
Yeah, good point, good point. Okay, so after you've done somebody's portrait, is there anything you should say thank you, obviously, right?
Namaste.
Oh, that's right, you already said that.
Namaste.
You
I
bow.
always do the namaste.
Okay. All right, 5 tips. 5 tips for better travel portraits.
Okay.
What do you got? What do you got?
The first one is observe.
Okay.
Get to your location and look. If you jump out and all of a sudden you start shooting, all you're going to get is snapshots. So observe. Pay attention to everything that's going on around you. Look at the rhythm of life, of what the flow is. Realizing what this person's going to do here, what's going on over here, where the light is coming from, anticipating. You see somebody walking down the street, and when they get here, they got a red shirt, there's a red background. Pay attention to that. So pay attention first off. Just take a breath. Take a breath, slow down, observe. Observe.
I like that. I like
See,
that.
and as I said, be seen. I think that's really important no matter where you are, in whatever country, in the US, in Naples. Pay attention to what's going on, right? The next thing is, if you're doing what I'm doing, is talk to your people and to smile and to somehow honor them. It's again recognizing that you're not, as soon as you look at them, putting the camera up to your eye, but actually talking to them. They see the camera and you're doing something with them. It's again, there's so much you can do with just moving your hands and sign language and smiling, that you have some kind of communication. They feel better about themselves. In the more primitive places, going along with this, of making them feel comfortable, is showing them the picture. The kids in Ethiopia go crazy. They all go crazy seeing the picture on the back of the camera. Everybody starts to laugh. They go get their friends and their relatives, and they want them to come over and show them. So that's another really big thing. But that's part of the honoring. Be prepared.
Okay.
That's really important. Am I on tip number 3?
Yes.
Okay, tip number 3. Be prepared. So in other words, when you're going to go photograph somebody, look around, get an idea what your exposure is going to be. If they're in the shade, you can pretty well just point in the shade and you can get an exposure reading that's going to be pretty close. Figure out what lens you're going to use, how much you want to include, so when you're coming up to photographing somebody, you're already technically ready. Have your technical stuff taken care of. You know, don't be stuck on your camera. You can do it all ahead of time. It's just you know, it's not that hard to figure out, and then you're prepared, and then you can be there with the person.
Good stuff.
The composition. Decide what your story is. What do you want to tell about the person? What do you want to include? So that's a combination of everything. I'm sorry, it's not the composition, it's the story.
The story, okay.
What's the concept? And that involves direction, quality, depth of light, how much you see, the composition, what's in the background, you know, pulling all of that together, posing somebody, expression, making it all match. So that's story, that concept. When I'm teaching my classes, I teach a lot of technique. Technique means nothing unless you have a concept. You have to have an idea. So what is it that you're trying to say? Okay, that really is just like so truly, truly important. What do I want to say? And then I can use all my technique to be able to get that idea across. And then the last one is the honor, is that remembering that we're all human beings here on the planet at the same time. We're all trying to live, and to treat people with dignity and respect always, no matter who they are, no matter what the circumstances are. They're still a human being just like you. So always treat them with honor and respect. And namaste. Do something that shows them that you have that you're treating them with that.
Yeah, I like that. That's nice. So what's coming up next for you? What's your next adventure? Now you're speaking here in Naples, Florida.
Yes,
tomorrow. But by the time this airs, tomorrow it's going to be too late to see you.
Yes.
So,
yes.
And what are you speaking about tomorrow?
Tomorrow I'm doing two things actually. I'm talking about the travel portraits. We're doing two presentations, and the other one is about we lead a tour to Venice Carnival every year.
Oh, I
so
knew
this
that
year
about
was
you.
my 8th year.
Okay.
And this specifically is about working with the costumers with flash, because we're in St. Mark's Square before dawn. The really good costumers know that the serious photographers are there before dawn. You bring your flash on camera, off camera. You do a whole variety of techniques. This thing we call dragging the shutter, which is balancing strobe and ambient light. So that's the other presentation.
Okay.
So it's all about working with the costumers in Venice and using your flash to illuminate. Awesome. So that is one of our travel trips. That is with my husband Lee Varys and an English photographer, David Nightingale. We've been doing this together for 8 years. Actually, next year will be our 9th year.
And when is that?
That's in February. It's always, it's Carnival, so it's Mardi Gras. It's always tied to Easter, so the date's always a little bit different every year. But the next thing we have is Tanzania, a safari.
Wow.
That is in August, and that is during wildebeest migration. So that's going to be just absolutely amazing. But you get the lions and the tigers and the giraffes and the rhinos and you get all of that. And we travel around the country. We go to see the Maasai. It's just going to be amazing. Last year was our first time going to Iceland, and we're going back to Iceland again in September. This is, everything you have ever heard about Iceland is true. It is spectacular. What you don't know is that it's also sublime. You can have rolling green fields with some cliffs with waterfalls, and there's sheep, and then you've got the ocean over here. There is so much to Iceland. It's a visual just delight with everything that's going on. The food is fantastic. It's everything about Iceland is great. And we go in September, middle to the end of September. So last year we had 2 nights of auroras.
Wow.
So this is again my husband and I. So it's Bobbi and Lee's photoadventures.com. I'll say that again a little bit later, but that is a trip that we do. We go with Focus on Nature, and Einar Erlendsson basically invented the photo tour in Iceland 12, 14 years ago. He knows all the little out of the way places. We do go to a couple of the big touristy places, like you have to go to the Glacier Lagoon and the Black Sand Beach.
Of course.
You have to go to the waterfall that you walk behind.
If you don't, you're going to feel like you're left out.
But that's it. All these other places that we go to, there's hardly anybody there because Einar knows these places. You're going down the road and you turn on this gravel road where there's no marking on it, and you drive down for like a mile or two and you're going, where are we going? And you come to a little hill, and you get out of the car, and Einar says, just go around the hill. And you go around this little hill, and there's a glacier coming down into a bay, and there's nobody else there.
Wow.
So time and time again, he would come up with these places, valleys, and it's amazing. So that's a big one. And then back to Myanmar in January. It's been 5 years since I've been to Myanmar, and Myanmar is one of the most beautiful and peaceful places, but also spectacular. There's Bagan with all the pagodas. There's 2,000 pagodas, and you can do a balloon ride over that.
Oh,
the
wow.
The people are all Buddhists, and 20% of the population are monks.
Oh,
so
20%?
20%, the highest population percentage of any country on earth in terms of belonging to a religious order.
Wow.
And all of the people are fantastic. They're so happy to talk to you, to see you. People, again, who have very little that want to feed you, give you tea. Do you want something to eat? Are you hungry? It's like, no, let me give you my protein bars. It's like, but wonderful country, just so stunningly beautiful, and beautiful, beautiful, beautiful people. So the major ones are, in this order, Tanzania, and then Iceland, and then Myanmar, and then Venice.
And do you have openings for?
We do. Actually, when is this going to go live?
I don't know.
Okay. We just had 2 people cancel for Tanzania.
Okay.
But the cutoff is May 9th.
Oh.
So we have
okay.
two cancellations for that. We have another couple of months for Iceland, and we're way far in advance for both Iceland, for both Venice and Myanmar. Although we have people signed up for those trips already. So you can find all of that at Bobbi and Lee's photoadventures.com. That's Bobbi. I don't have an E on my name. Bobbi and Lee's, Lees, photoadventures.com, all one word. And that has all of our education on it. So it talks about the workshops that we do in the States, our travel workshops. We do mentoring. Lee has his own YouTube channel, so there's all kinds of tutorials about post-processing. You know, he's the Adobe wizard. So we have a lot of information to share with people. And
awesome.
I think that's about it for what's coming up. There's a whole lot of other stuff, classes in the States that are coming up, but
it's all on your website.
It's all on the website.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Awesome.
so you can find out about all of that.
Well, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here, and I hope that I was able to help somebody to make a better portrait or a better picture in any way that you possibly can. And if you haven't been photographing people, it's fun to try. You know, with some of these tips, get out of your comfort zone, and you never know what you're going to come up with. You may find something that you'll completely and totally fall in love with.
I love it.
So thank you so much for having me here. I'm really a delight.
Thank you for coming. It was awesome. And thank you to the audience for tuning in, however you tuned in. If you did tune in on iTunes, we'd really, really appreciate a review on iTunes. That helps us a lot. Remember, the show notes are on understandphotography.com. You'll see it says right at the top of the page, it says the Understand Photography Show. And if you look today, whenever you're watching this, it'll be at the top of the page for Bobbi Lane. So all of this stuff, not everything we talked about, but the highlights of what we talked about. Some of Bobbi's beautiful pictures will be there as well. I'm Peggy Farron. Thanks so much for watching the Understand Photography Show. We'll see you next Friday at 4 o'clock Eastern Time.